you'll let again, first WebEx meeting, guys, so bear with me. This is going to be, as I say, a wild ride. So we'll see how this is going to go. And I'm entirely paperless today, so everything's on the same screen. It's going to be fun. Sorry, I hope this wasn't like live broadcast. Do you want to start the live broadcast, Colette?
Yes, you're free to start, yeah.
Fantastic, right. Well, a very good morning to everybody for this meeting of the Complaints and Conduct Committee. Without any further ado, we will launch straight into our agenda because we've got quite a lot of really good points to cover this morning. So before we start, just again to let you know, we are obviously using WebEx for this committee. Should I drop off, Colette will let the attendees know, and the meeting will be paused until I will hopefully be able to rejoin the call. Again, also just before we progress with the agenda, I would just like to note that, Stuart, I believe this is your first meeting since your appointment as ACC. So congratulations on that. Obviously very good news. In terms of apologies, I have got Chris Brown down from the SPA and DCC Alan Spears. Got no other apologies, I believe, Colette.
That's correct, yeah.
That's great. Right, so then on to declarations of interest and any connections. Are there any declarations of interest for any of the items on the agenda this morning? And I can see none, so that's good. And I have been notified of no other business this morning. And I don't see anybody else wanting to raise any other business, which is good. So then the next one is our decision on taking business in private, and that's for the items 9 to 12. And again, that's in accordance with the section 20 of the SPA standing orders. Can I please ask members consent to do so? Okay, thank you. I see no dissent. Thank you. Right, so that takes us on to the minutes and actions from the previous meeting. There are, I believe, 3 sets of minutes for us to approve. So we have firstly the public, the minutes from the Complaints and Conduct Committee held on the 24th of February. That's for approval. Can I please ask if members are content to approve this as a correct record? I think members are content to approve it as a correct record. Then from that same session, on the 27th of February, we've got the public minute from the private meeting. And again, I would like to invite members to approve that as a correct record. And again, I can see no dissent. And then we also had the public minute from the private meeting of the committee session held on the 25th of April, which was just a single agenda item talk session that was done. And again, can we please approve that as a correct record? Again, I see no dissent. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so this takes us into our action log and matters arising. And there's quite a few actions that we have that are proposed for closure. And we also have some actions. We've got 7 actions proposed for closure, 5 actions proposed ongoing. And I suggest that we go into the action log and walk through that just to make sure that members are content with the recommendations to either close or keep on going, because I think there've been some of the actions have attracted rather meaty updates as well, which is good. So let's just step through that. If you just bear with me whilst, as I said, toggle between documents. Right. And could maybe members do me a favor, not just members, but attendees, can we maybe start with some of the oldest outstanding actions? I've been going through the action log this morning, and I actually think it makes sense to kind of start at the back and work our way up to the more recent actions, because I think it just shows kind of the evolution of some of the thinking. So if you bear with me, if you maybe start at the back of the action log and work our way backwards or up, whichever way it makes sense for us. Is that okay? Yeah, okay, good. Right, because there's a few there at the end that are proposed for closure as well. So if I look at the action around 2023-01-06-005. So that is the Police Scotland performance report. So that's in relation to diversity information that can be drawn in for both officers and complainers in the absence of a systems update. Now, this is an action which obviously has been open for about a year. We have received various updates throughout the year, and we knew the dependency on the Centurion system with this one. And the latest update we have is that the version 4.4 of the database has now been delivered, which is excellent. It allows Police Scotland to capture diversity information, as well as sex and ethnicity and any disability. So that's good. This action is proposed for closure. And the only question I had here, Fiona, please.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I think there's great progress here, which is encouraging, and it will be good to see that data coming through. The if volunteered bit, I would wondered if we could have a bit more information. So I'm on balance content to close. I'm interested to other people's views, but I'd be interested in the if volunteered, complainer, sex, ethnicity, and disability. What that means.
Thank you. Who would like to come in on that? Could somebody illuminate a little bit more as to what does it mean if volunteered? And when are we expected to have some of the data? What is the current thinking around presenting and making that information more widely available? Helen, please.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry. So just to confirm, obviously the upgrade happened to the Centurion system so that this enables us to start capturing the data. We're just working at the moment in terms of the sort of the business practice around it, in terms of the complaint handling form, and to make sure that that is working through in terms of enabling us to capture the data. So it is continuing to be work in progress in terms of actually when we'll be able to start presenting that to you. But we certainly hope to keep moving forward, and it's moving in the right direction. I know you'd probably like a more detailed time kind of position on it, but we will commit to getting that to you as soon as we possibly can. But as I say, we're just having to work through the practices around it as well.
Yeah, thank you for that update.
So, Chair, may I ask? I didn't quite catch the understanding of if volunteered.
So I think that's in relation to, obviously, you know, if they wish to provide that information and that data to us in terms of that. So at the moment, sometimes the data can be captured in terms of the context in which the matter is being raised to us. But I think it's that part of the volunteered part. But I'll certainly go away and just confirm that the wording around that, if that's all right.
I mean, it may well be that if you're working through the processes, that the typical process for capturing protected data and protected characteristics is there in terms of right across society, in terms of you're asked to provide it if you wish, and there's an explanation about why it's provided, and it will be, you know, the usual, it'll be confidential, etc., etc. So I would hope it would be something like that, but I would look forward to an update on that. Thanks, Chair.
Yes, very, very much. I know the ACC is going to come in. Apologies, I'm having a few sound difficulties, but hopefully we can sort this out. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. We can definitely hear you, so I hope you get your issue sorted. I saw, I know, Stuart, you want to come in, but Katrina, did you want to come in on this as well? Maybe I'll bring Katrina in first, Stuart, and then I'll bring you.
Yeah, yes, I'll be just following on from Fiona's comment. I mean, I'm assuming there are issues around consent here, and that's hence the wording. But yes, it would be interesting to see how that process has evolved going forwards. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Stuart.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. I think it's that very point that's just been made. It's about making sure the wording of what we're asking for, particularly in the forms that may be in the public domain or on our website, about how the wording is there to make sure we volunteer that information correctly. And I think that's about, we just need to check that that's compliant with other aspects as well, and that'll work through as we go through and update that process, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Yeah. Darren, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And it was just to supplement what's been said already. Myself, along with colleagues from the PERC and Police Scotland, will work in this space through the National Complaint Handling Development Group, recognising this is as much about assuring people around about how that information will be treated, but also being clear around about the benefits of providing that information and how it further informs our approach to complaint handling. So that's an area we can focus on as part of the National Complaint Handling Development Group.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. No, thank you for those updates. So I think what I take from this really helpful conversation is we now have the technical functionalities there, the capabilities there. There is a process, there is the complaints handling working group that Darren just referenced. Yeah, it's at this stage, it's about really maximizing public trust in the approach, and really just trying to get as rich a data from this as possible, which is exactly what we need. Can I just double check though? So the action per se related specifically to diversity information for both the complainers as well as in relation to officers or staff against whom a complaint is potentially made. So can somebody just maybe cover that? So because as I say, the update is primarily oriented towards the complainers. So what is the current status with regards to capturing diversity information for officers and staff?
Chair, if it's okay, I think we would be able to capture that at the moment from what we have on our slope system in any case, so that could be transferred across. So I think we're quite content that that would be answered for certainly officers and staff in an easier way.
Okay, that's good. What I would then propose is, so I think there is consensus then to close this action, which is good. Can we maybe request an update in about in an appropriate time period? I don't want to be, stipulating pulling something out of thin air, but I trust that between Darren, as between our SPA colleagues and our Police Scotland colleagues, that you can come to a consensus as to when is a good time to actually bring an update to this committee around, okay, we've had the functionality, we've been live, this has been running, we've been trying to get data. So at some stage, within the next 12 months, it would be, I think, really beneficial for the committee to have an update on that. And as I say, it would be good to have that dual focus. So not just on the complainers' diversity data, but also on the officers and staff who are subject to complaints as well. Stuart, is that okay?
Yeah. Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I just wondered if it would be really useful to actually give a wider update on the Centurion upgrade and all its functionality, and that we could capture that in the one update, if that would be okay with yourself.
Yes, that would be fine, but I think there needs to be a dual focus there. So one is on the wider what Centurion can do for us, and then on what's happening with the data as well. So as long as we've got that dual focus, absolutely, very, very, very interested to hear what it's been so long in the making, the upgrade. So really keen to hear how that hopefully has made is making your department's job easier.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Right. So content to close this one, and that is just quite a good feeling. I think this has been one of the longest standing actions. So I'm glad that we've got that closed, and that progress has been made here. So the next one, again, moving kind of up, is the 2023-0106. So that's in relation to irregularity in procedure and quality of service. And I think the latest, so it says an update will be provided to the committee. It's proposed ongoing. I actually had some thoughts around that. And I think, again, if I cast my mind back, because it is a longer standing action, I think the background to this was that as a committee, we were really trying to get into those two particular complaints categories, because irregularity in procedure accounts for a substantial proportion of overall complaints volumes. Quality of service does as well, and actually we know that there is a number of other kind of subcategories there, etc. So I think the original thrust of the action was for the committee to get better assurance as to what sits beneath that, so we can get a better understanding of what does it actually mean. I think since then, we've also had really quite good discussions around just generally categorization of complaints, how complaints are captured, are they appropriately categorized. And I know that, again, we'll probably touch on this really, we'll touch on this later in kind of during the committee. Hot off the press, I know the SPA colleagues have done some work on benchmarking around complaints data, categorization and reporting as well. I know this is literally hot off the press. I know it's currently in the process of being shared with Police Scotland. So not proposing that we go into too much detail on this just now, but what was going through my head is that really what we need, I think, more of a focus on categorization of complaints. So rather than, having a specific focus on these two categories or asking for an informal session or asking for a special deep dive on this, I think there is a broader question here around, can we have something more focused, a more focused analysis on how complaints are categorized, whether or not there are any enhancements that can be made, and as part of that work, can we get a little bit more under the bonnet of some of the larger complaints categories, which are the quality of service and irregularity of procedure. So I suppose what I'm proposing, if members are content, that rather than keeping this action as ongoing, because I feel like after a year we're still not quite there yet, that we reframe that from a perspective of, can we just take a step back and really understand how are complaints categorized? Does it work for Police Scotland and for us? And really get a little bit more into some of the broader categories, and is there any scope for improvement? As I say, particularly considering some of the benchmarking activity, which is still working its way through between SPA and Police Scotland. Does that make sense? Sorry, that was a very long-winded way of saying I think we might need to kind of close this action and supersede that by something that is just a bit more relevant, I think, because our thinking has evolved.
Yes.
Members content with that? Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Can I just double check with our Police Scotland colleagues if that request makes sense? Helen.
Yes, thank you. We will, we definitely be able to pick that up. I guess what we've been trying to do is make sure that there is more data within our performance report around that. So that's been a sort of journey that we've been on over the last year in terms of that. But we can certainly take a pause and just see how else we might be able to provide that, and whether that would be in a one-off paper in some form to you away from our performance report, or whether you'd like that as more detail within, and maybe that's something that we can reflect on after the meeting today.
Of course, Helen. No, thank you for that. And just to clarify, I think there has been some really good work done on the presentation of data in the performance report. I think the question here is just a little bit more, it's a step back from purely what is currently being presented. It's more of a question, is the categorization of complaints, the way that Police Scotland currently capture complaints, is it working? Is it the most appropriate way to do it, particularly vis-a-vis maybe other forces, the way they capture complaints? I'm not suggesting that a massive overhaul is needed, but I suppose I'm asking for this critical assessment. Does it work? Is it as good as it could be? Are there any known issues? Is there, so looking at that really kind of critical of, I know the data is getting much better and is getting more granular, but are we still categorizing things appropriately?
Yep.
That's I suppose what we're getting to.
And I think that, if I can, sorry, come in,
I
think that links with some of the work that PERC's been doing recently in relation to the recent audit as well. And obviously we're going to be looking at the recommendations coming out of there, moving forward with that as well. So I think that would link in with that, and we'll be able to cover that.
Perfect. Right. Okay, thank you. Sounds good. Right. So on we are closing this action and we are opening another action to specifically looking at categorization of complaints and whether that works for us or not. Okay, good. Fabulous. So that enables us to move further up again. So that's 2023-22-08-006. This one relates to drawing out learnings, operation improvements within the performance report to show concrete evidence of learning from complaints. And here, absolutely, we've seen a really good development where the examples of learning and operation improvements are now included into the quarterly performance report. And that's really good. This action is proposed to close. I think some of the conversations we've had around this are, yes, we're seeing the regular data, but I think what may be, and I think members are content at this stage to close this action. But what I would quite like to do, what I would like to propose is, when we see things on a quarterly basis, it's good to see them because they kind of come in sort of in a more timely fashion. But organizational learning is a much kind of broader theme as well. What I would propose, rather than having an ongoing kind of action around this, is would it be reasonable to ask to have maybe an annual kind of report that comes to us, just part of our standard kind of working plan, which could be an amalgamation of the quarterly improvement opportunities, learnings, etc. And again, a bit of a reflection from management as to whether or not you think that process is working for you. Because I think what we are kind of missing when we only see the quarterly improvement opportunities and learnings, we're missing that kind of management overview, from Police Scotland as to whether or not you think it's working, could be improved. And and hopefully you'll agree that Paul, you'd like to come in. Does that make sense?
Just the observation is sometimes if you get things reported too frequently, it's difficult to track changes because nothing looks like it changes. So yeah, I'm supportive of your approach.
Thank you, Paul. Again, a very, very long way of saying, could we maybe have an annual report that kind of sums all of the quarterly stuff up together with a management narrative as to whether you feel it's working for you? Helen?
Yes, and I think we'd welcome that, because I think it will enable us to show that journey through the learning that's taken. So, and I would just ask if, in terms of timescales, when you would like to see that, but we can obviously confirm that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would suggest that you work with our with Darren just to see when is it good to kind of include it into like into our annual work schedule.
Perfect.
Because we're flexible. We're absolutely flexible about this. Perfect. Thank you. That's good. Right, moving further up. So we have the 2023-22-08-005 Police Scotland. So this is in relation to the ability to discharge Lady and Julie's recommendations. And this one is proposed for closure. I think, and again, I know that we've had an update from Darren on this, and Darren, I might bring you in on this as well, because I know you're much closer to the detail. So firstly, I would just like to really pay credit to Helen and the team and everybody at Police Scotland for kind of, and obviously to our SPA colleagues as well, for working really quite closely. I think we are now getting, we are very, very close to really closing this, closing of Lady Angelini, or submitting that for closure. Darren, I think there was some outstanding request around trend data, which doesn't necessarily need to come to this committee, but as long as it's included into our annual report. Is that right, Darren? I'm going to bring you in at this stage.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So there are two recommendations outstanding. One is more broad around about committee oversight of complaints. Yeah. The other one is more specifically around about ongoing complaints and conduct matters and scrutiny around about delays. So in terms of the first one, there's been an awful lot of work that's been done in this space by Police Scotland to their credit, and notwithstanding there may be opportunities for further improvement in terms of the kind of minimum data set that had been sought for the first of these recommendations. The outstanding point was around about trend analysis across all allegations information categories, something that Lady Eilish specifically called out in the narrative of her report. So we will have that provided by Police Scotland, as we've had in previous years, for inclusion in the committee annual report. So it is information that's provided, but not currently provided in terms of the reports to committee. So my proposal, if you're content, in the first recommendation is that, subject to that information being provided for our annual report, and Police Scotland providing that trend data proportionately, recognising that the ongoing trend information is most helpful on a year-on-year basis, so potentially those annual reports, but subject to agreement for inclusion of that comprehensive data, that actually we could put that one forward for closure now. In terms of the second of those recommendations, and recognising that we're talking about individual cases here, and therefore the balance of public and private reporting. Again, a lot of development in this space has happened with a lot better reporting information publicly in terms of closed complaints and conduct matters in the public space. There was a request for a high-level narrative in the public report, which I think could easily be provided now in general terms that describes those complaints over 12 months that have been closed, and the reasons for those delays in high-level terms, which I appreciate can be for a variety of reasons, including complexity, stakeholder engagement, for example. And then in the private space, as you're aware, we will have a report coming later on today, which looks at ongoing cases. I think Police Scotland have my own view as an official is for members clearly to consider, but I think it was presented as a first pass. I think it's a good first pass. Police Scotland have quite rightly said that they welcome feedback in terms of future reporting, but again, subject to incorporation of any feedback from members later on. Again, my proposal would be that we submit that second recommendation for closure as well.
Okay. Thank you for that, Darren. Really helpful, very, very clearly laid out. And I appreciate we're jumping a little bit here because, this is obviously an action, which is good, so almost two parts to that. What I would propose we do is, again, if members are content, I propose that we close this action as it stands now. We will consider, obviously, when we talk about the so taking that to the first point which Darren mentioned, which is around trend data. I think that's relatively non-controversial. So if we're happy with the fact that there will be trend data on an annual basis being reported, then I think that's something that unless members disagree, I think we can say, right, we're happy for that to be submitted for closure. When it comes to the time element, I would suggest that we defer that judgment until we have had the chance to discuss the report in private, and also consider how some of that can be pulled going forward into the public space. And then if necessary, we can open another action around that if we're not content at that stage to submit it for closure. Does that make sense? Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. I see lots of nodding, which is good. I think that's a good outcome. I see Helen smiling as well. So that's a good outcome. Right. Okay. So we propose to agree to close this action. Very good. Thank you for that. And so again, moving further up, it's the 2023-14-11-007. Here we have, that's in relation to the 6-monthly update on recommendations, really in relation to the professional boundaries program. This one is, so we do have a paper to present it under agenda item 6. This one is proposed for closure. Are members content to have this one for closure? Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. Fabulous, thank you for that. Then the next one we don't have an update on, so that's 2023-14-11-003. And that's in relation to a PSD Park liaison event. So I think that was the last update we had. Sorry, can I just double check? Do we have an update on this one from Police Scotland? Or Fiona, you've got a question before I bring anybody in.
It's probably more, well, an observation and a question. I'm putting a number of things together, high level of abandoned complaints, low level of upheld complaints, and calling complaints non-deserving or low level. I'm thoughtful about what that says about the due respect that's given to complaint handling. So it's more just a question of, can we think through in our conversations just how we categorise things and move into that learning space about learning and improvement. So it bothers me that we're still calling complaints non-deserving and low level. Now, in everyone else's defence and the criticism of myself, that's probably been there for ages. And although I've talked about, I'm really uncomfortable about that, I don't think I've picked that up in the action log. So apologies for that, Chair.
Thank you, Fiona. Good point, really well made. Helen, you'd like to come in?
Thank you. I was going to say I completely agree in terms of just the point of the use of language and how important that is. And I'll give that reassurance that we continue to sort of develop our practices and our thinking around that. And I think it's really important that we do reflect and take on board the feedback around that, because actually that experience of the person raising the complaint is really important within this as well. I do hope that our discussion and the private session later with the paper that's been submitted might cover some of these points that have been raised within this. So as I say, hopefully that will enable us to have some discussion around that, and then we can see what further work requires to be done after that.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Darren?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was probably just to give some context here to the action, notwithstanding the points made around about the wording. I think that the committee was specifically interested here in terms of the triage of complaints. So I think it's just to provide that clarity. Yeah,
thank you, Darren. So again, considering that this action has been open for a period of time, and considering considering the discussion we've just had, can I maybe suggest again that we subsume this one into the previous, into the broader question around categorization and triage, because again, they go really hand in hand. I know, again, you know, Helen, you indicated there is a PERC audit which is coming, so there may well be some further insight. I'm quite hopeful. So can we maybe, my preference is rather than having actions on an action log which are not moving, you know, there isn't insufficient traction, as we kind of crystallize our thinking as to what we're really concerned with, that we just close this one and we absolutely subsume this point around triage into that broader, right, let's have a look at how we do categorization and triage. Okay, are members content with that? Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you for that. That's good. Apologies, I'm toggling between screens. There we go. Right, so then we have 2023 1411-002, and this one is around timelines and targets. And absolutely, we will be discussing that as part of agenda item 11. And this was proposed ongoing, and I do think that we probably do need to keep this one open at this stage. We can assess how the conversation progresses around agenda item 11. But at this stage, I would suggest that we keep this ongoing. Members content with that? Yeah, okay, that's great. Right. So the next one is 2023 1411-001, and that was sorry, apologies. That was in relation to, again, there's been a lengthy update provided this one. So explore what the increased demand against static or reduced workforce would mean from a risk-based perspective. in terms of achieving objectives. This was proposed ongoing. Again, and apologies for kind of doing the working out life in the committee, but I think there is potentially scope. So to me, this action is actually linked with the action below around timelines. So the way our understanding of the potentially resource constraints in the PSD department has been evolving over the last 6 months. So I remember DCC Spears raised that in November. We had a really helpful conversation, and then at the February committee again, we got some more insights, I think, from yourself, Helen, and from colleagues around these are the levels of demand that are coming in. This is the available resource. Obviously, timelines are really quite, it all works together, so it's all part of a system. So again, in the interest of getting some traction on this action, and again, it talks about obviously item 11. Again, I suggest that we have the conversation at item 11. At the moment, we keep it ongoing. We have the conversation, and then maybe we either reframe the action around timelines and resources and demands, and you know, what you're proposing to do about addressing timeliness issues and resourcing issues. But I think we probably need to have the substantive discussion first before, so propose keep on going, and we have the substantive discussion a bit later in the committee. Yeah, okay. Right. Then we have 3 actions which are proposed for closure. And I will not pain my colleagues by going through them individually just to check if members are content to close those. Yes, I see Paul nodding quite emphatically. Everybody is, I think, relieved. I'm not going through them one by one. And then there is performance report. So we've just touched on that. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. That's the 2024-27-02004. That's proposed ongoing. And again, the one above that, so which is the 003 from the same meeting, that's also proposed ongoing. Again, pending the discussion around item 11. So are colleagues content to keep that ongoing until we have that discussion? Yes, perfect, thank you. And then we have got the 002 from the February meeting. This is a really interesting one. So that's in relation to understanding complainant satisfaction, and there has been a really quite a comprehensive update provided to the committee in the action log. So thank you, police colleagues, for police government colleagues for this. I think it's really good to know. Content to close this on the proviso of, could we please see some of that data at the committee, because I think we would all be incredibly interested in what the feedback is. I will leave it up to our SPA colleagues to liaise with Police Scotland to understand what's the best way to present the information, because I appreciate at the moment it's management information that you're receiving on the satisfaction levels rather than governance information per se. But I think it would be really good from a public interest perspective for some of that to be discussed at this committee. So I hope Police Scotland colleagues, you're amenable to that. Yeah, okay, good, fabulous. And you will be very pleased to hear that this is us reaching the end of our action log, with the last action, which is also proposed ongoing. So that's in relation to obviously a deep dive. And I know that colleagues have been trying to juggle diaries, so we will get the session in before October. Thank you everybody for that. Okay, right. I only can apologize for this rather marathon session around actions, but I just felt we had to get on top of some of that, because I do not like to have actions open for longer than a year. It just doesn't quite feel right. And I think we've managed to make some kind of really quite good decisions here. So thank you for bearing with me, colleagues. Right. This means I can stop talking now. And the next agenda item for us is decisions taking since last meeting. We've taken no decisions since this last meeting, so I can confirm that, which means that the next agenda item is agenda item 3, and that is, Helen, I believe, over to you. It's the Police Scotland Professional Standards Annual Performance Report.
Thanks, Chair. If it's okay, I was going to just say a
sorry,
few words
Stuart.
to start with. No, it's
Apologies.
okay. We're going to do a double act. So
Right.
I'll maybe do a wee bit of an introduction, and I'll probably, to sort of make it easier, maybe refer to page 39 of the papers, which is page 4 of that report, is that executive summary, which I think is really useful for us. And it gives that number of complaints over the course of the year and what we've seen. But also, I think it's really useful, and the fact is that we've seen the change in referrals to PARC, which, and again, 83% has resulted in no investigation, which again is that part that we're really thankful for, that we're able to get that early link in with PARC and some of the stuff that we do, particularly when a number of those have been in relation to the discharge of taser, which is again that sort of officer welfare and well-being and protection of them is absolutely crucial. I'll let Helen come in a wee bit more into the depths of things. The number of suspended officers and subject restrictions does vary all the time. We are slightly increased from the end of the year figures at the moment, but I'm sure we can touch on that later on. But I think overall that it's a really good report that covers a lot of work that's been ongoing by the department. The part about the prevention's professionalism being added into that, which I know was an action that's now discharged, is really important to show that ongoing work, particularly with the publication of the internal newsletters and standard, and us being able to share misconduct outcomes, I think is a good news story. And the fact is it shows the work that's ongoing, but also is that it does add to that prevention piece as well, about telling people, reminding those standards of professional behaviour. And the final thing I'll say before we hand on to Helen to go in a wee bit deeper is about the introduction of the PECS bill as a crucial part of our work going on just now, and will influence some of the work that you see in front of you there going forward in the future, but it's something that we're really keen to support and going forward.
Okay.
Stuart.
Thank you very much. I will continue on from what the ACC has covered there. So just starting, and I know the ACC has just reflected, but I think it's really important just to put out some of the preventions activity work that's ongoing. We had an extremely positive ethical policing CPD event at Tullyallen on the 23rd of April that was extremely well attended by colleagues from across the whole organisation, for us to sort of challenge and explore our thinking and raise awareness about sort of ethical policing. So that's been very positively reviewed. We've put out further editions of the standard and also our gross misconduct outcomes, which again have been positively received across the organisation. This time within the standard, we reflected on the sort of lived experience of others and encouraging officers and staff across the organisation to reflect and how can we make a positive impact in terms of that. And again, that's been positively received. And just finally, and it touches on some of the points that I've discussed within the action log as well, just a joint PERC and PSD training event that took place between the 9th and 12th of April, and kind of really building on previous work around looking at complaint handling training. So I think that should hopefully positively reflect in some of the work and the discussion as we continue to move forward with that. Moving on now, in terms of the next 2 pages cover the dashboards that give you that summary in terms of the demand and volume within the professional standards department. Looking back over the year, the 3,174 gateway referrals, and I know we've previously discussed here at committee about the sort of sexual misconduct element within that, so that has been pulled out just to highlight the 48 referrals received in that, and then covers the other areas of business within the professional standards department. The next dashboard I won't go into too much detail with, as we'll go into some of the detail as we work through the content of the report, but again at the end very happy to take any questions in respect of those. So moving on to page 5 in terms of the report, and looking in terms of the complaints that have been received. So as detailed in the report, just over the 7,000 complaints received year to date, and we see that 5.1% increase from the previous year to date and 8.3% increase in terms of the 5-year average. It does show in the chart 1, in relation just that elevated level that we've been experiencing, even beating the spike seen during the COVID-19 initial lockdown period. So really high in terms of demand. And even since this report has run, just in terms of, as obviously this is management information, the data will change as we move forward. And even that has increased further. I think we're at the level of about just over 7,200 now in terms of that yearly report. So again, that peak really seen in terms of that last year around that. Of that, 3,499 complaints were FLR'd during that, which is 49.3%. And there is the option that will continue as we work through some of the complaints that are still within the system, because we do have that opportunity for further discussion with the complainer in relation to that. So we are expecting that to rise further. In terms of the NCARU work, which is obviously that first point of resolution and assessment by the unit, the FLR there has risen from 38.1% to 45.6% year to date. So I think that's very positive, just showing the high level of successful FLR at that initial stage. And when we talk about the experience of people raising complaints in terms of that, I think that early and swift resolution to the matter and resolving it clearly with their agreement in terms of that FLR action is really, really good to see. The report then goes on to detail the further breakdown in terms of the complaints. I just pull out in terms of the criminal relates to 6.2% in terms of that, which is sitting at 442. There was nothing further I was going to comment in terms of that report, just to give the reassurance that clearly we continue to monitor across the different areas. Sorry, in terms of that page, could continue to monitor across the different areas. And as you would be aware, the national increase does sit above the confidence limits that we monitor as well, just showing again that in terms of volume increase that we have experienced. Moving on to page 6, chart 3 shows the complaint received per quarter. It does show, obviously, at the start of last year, the huge increase in quarter 1 and 2, and that the level have dropped off slightly in the remaining quarters, which is obviously good to see in terms of that. But we continue just to monitor that. And as I said, we continue to run that data, and it is now looking at the final data is showing that the 7.2% increase compared to year to date at the end of the year. Moving on to page 7. Within the report, and this is where we try to give a little bit more detail around some of the emerging trends that we're seeing across the complaints. I'll just touch on the discriminatory behaviour allegations. I know that's been previously discussed, and we are seeing an increase of 34 from the previous year to date, and 49% in terms of the 5-year average. So that's the number of allegations in relation to discriminatory behaviour. This is mainly influenced by an increase within the race subtype, and there is 88 such allegations received year to date in relation to race. Again, we've done a bit of a deeper dive in relation to that, and in relation to those 88 allegations, while they're low in volume in terms of the overall position of complaints, I think it's really important that we understand in terms of any trends and patterns within that. So we had looked and examined across all allegations with the race subtype. We do see obviously that the main areas relate to, complainer being subject to police action or a perceived lack of action by police. So that might relate to different engagements in terms of with police officers. And I would just give the reassurance that we're really looking to pull out how we can offer reassurance to complainers, work with our Policing Together colleagues, just to see, given the organisational focus within this, so how can we provide that further reassurance in terms of how we monitor, track and make sure that we're taking learning and opportunities from these complaints. So I've touched in terms of the racial allegations there, or the subtype within that. We have also had a look at sexual orientation and gender subtypes within that. Again, low numbers, the sexual orientation, look at 15 allegations year to date, but again, a small increase from the previous year to date. And the gender subtype with 29 allegations received, which is a 9 increase from the previous year to date. So just to give the committee that reassurance in terms of the deeper dives that we're doing again there, and again, the kind of reasons for it, similar to the race subtype within that as well. So as I say, keen to work with our Policing Together colleagues to see how we can continue to offer reassurance and give that to those that do raise complaints, and then also to give the reassurance to the committee that we continue to monitor and track those. Moving on, in terms of emerging trends, assault allegations have previously been discussed as well, which remain significantly above the 5-year average in relation to that. I don't intend to go into any more detail detail, but again, happy to take any questions from the committee in relation to that. And finally, within the emerging trends, the quality of service. So while this has decreased from the previous year to date, they do remain above the 5-year average and are among the highest volume of allegation types, which I think, Chair, also you commented on, you know, in terms of where we see the largest volume within that. So again, we have done a sort of analysis and looked at the 3 highest volume of subtypes within each of the allegation types. So if we look at policy and procedure, where we have seen a decrease of 405, but where the main volume sits was within policing procedure. Within that one, so that type of thing is inquiry or investigation, or actual sort of police action, so the complainant being dissatisfied at being arrested. In terms of service delivery, we have seen a decrease of 286, but again, we've looked at the type of response where the highest volume sits within that, and that could link to lack of police action, police attendance, communication as well. So again, looking to make sure we can pick up trends. And in terms of service outcome, in terms of a decrease of 337, the main one that stands out with there is the lack of satisfaction with action taken. So again, having a look at some of the detail within some of those allegations in terms of that, and continuing to have a look at any trends within that. Moving on to page 8, in terms of emerging trends, and again, having a look at any increase within the subtypes within irregularity in procedure, insufficient updates to the complainer to complainers, increase of 33 last year, and 22 against the 5-year average, with you know, certain areas identified, Tayside being one where there's primary influence. So clearly looking at how we can work with local divisions and feed that back to them. And road traffic as well stands out with an increase of 49. We took an opportunity to highlight that within a recent edition of the Standard, just to put out some prevention messages around that. Moving on in terms of page 9, where there is some detail there, the full breakdown of allegations received year to date within the subtypes within that. And again, happy to take any questions in respect of that, but I won't go into any more detail at this point. Moving on in terms of page 10, looks at service delivery, which has remained at a relatively stable rate in terms of that. And again, happy to take any questions in terms of the service delivery. Moving on in terms of the PERC referrals, I know the ACC covered that, so I don't intend to pause it any further in relation to page 11, other than to just draw obviously the kind of overview in terms of the year there, the 300 statutory referrals made across to PERC in relation to that, and just reflecting obviously in terms of that inclusion of the Article 3, and now as we move forward the Article 5 referrals into PERC in respect of that as well. The final sections of the report go into the conduct unit, and what we have tried to do is to reflect on some of the previous feedback, just to make sure that the data and the information provided within the reports reflect on that. We have seen that 18.3% in preliminary assessments carried out in conduct, which I think is really positive and a reflection of some of the preventions and the standard campaign in which we've been running in terms of encouraging reporting, and then making sure that we're taking the proportionate action within professional standards in relation to these matters, where it is there opportunity for improvement action, when there can be swift learning identified, then obviously we take that opportunity, then taking the more serious matters in terms of misconduct and gross misconduct, and moving that forward within the conduct area. So in page 13, it provides a bit of a breakdown in terms of the number of cases, just to give you an indication of in terms of timescales. And again, we can go into these in more detail within the private session, but gives you an overview of the cases and the matters sitting within the conduct unit at the moment, both investigations and proceedings, and a summary of the misconduct hearing disposals of last year, in which there was the 33 misconduct hearings, and just pulling out of the 6 dismissals within that, but also the 13 officers that retired and resigned during that period last year, with the others receiving a variety of different levels in terms of warnings. The report concludes with pulling out the organisational learning, which I know was discussed within the action, and clearly we will reflect on that and just see how we can provide that longer term position around that and reflections moving forward. But that was probably all I was going to comment on in terms of the report, and welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, for the report and the very comprehensive update. It still continues to evolve, and I really welcome the inclusion of some of the additional graphs around timelines. Really helpful. And I also think the deep dive into the race subcategory, again, really welcome that that's been kind of quite proactive. Can I just before I bring Paul in, I see colleagues will undoubtedly have questions. On this specific one, can I actually just double check? So does that include the complaints which are frontline resolved as well? So my understanding is that data around increases in race-related incidents or allegations, that would include the frontline resolved complaints as well?
Yeah. So that's looking across all of our complaints in terms of that.
Across
Yes.
all of them. Okay, thank you.
But sorry, if I can just come in. Clearly, that's where it's been identified that it's linked to in terms of discrimination, or the complainer has kind of shared that as being either the driving, the motivator, in terms of their input to that. So that's been captured in terms of that. So what we do try and do is make sure where there is or can capture that. And I do think as we move forward in terms of the data upgrade and bringing that into our working practices, that we will be able to get more detail around that as well.
Yeah, okay, no, absolutely. And I ask because I know that obviously colleagues at Semper have been quite interested in racial breakdown of frontline complaints, etc. So really keen to kind of understand, and I think you've just answered my question, which is when is there going to be more of a visibility around all of the complaints with that race lens as well? And I think you've just answered that question. Sorry, Helen, yeah, do you want to come back in?
And if I can add one further,
Yeah.
we're doing some work with the diversity staff associations at the moment, just to sort of break down some of the barriers and build their understanding and our understanding in terms of some of the impactful factors and that type of thing. So that's been a really useful session that we ran last month with them, and then we look forward to continue to build on that. So that brought Semper into that discussion so that we can learn from each other as we continue to move forward and monitor some of these trends. And we are trying to be more transparent around these factors.
Yeah, it would be again really good in your future reports if you specifically highlight, because I think that it is so important to the committee. And again, it just gives us a high level of assurance knowing that there is that engagement with the staff associations and the feedback is being taken on board, and it's being responded to properly, because obviously their perspective is incredibly valuable on this. So thank you for that. I have got Paul, and then I had Fiona. Fiona, were you specifically related on this point? I saw your hand go up and down again. No, okay, that's great. Well, thank you. In that case, I'll open that up to colleagues. And Paul, as I say, you've been very patient.
Yeah, and I am specifically related to this point because I just wanted to drill down a little bit more into the discriminatory behaviour allegations. So I'm looking at this, and it looks like a 27% increase in year to date and a 49% number allegations from the 5-year average. What was the 5-year average figure?
So in terms of, so that's the 49, so that's 110 in terms of the 5-year average. So it's kind of number of allegations in terms of that.
Yeah. What's the baseline 5-year average?
It in terms of the 110 in terms of, sorry, the percentage.
Well, you've got 159 for year to date,
Yep.
and you take off 34,
Yep.
which is the additional, so that comes to 125.
Yep.
So that's the year to date.
Yep.
You've got an increase of 49 in the 5-year of allegations in the 5-year average. All I'm asking is what the 5-year average figure is.
It is against the 110, so the 159 showing off with the 49 increase.
Right, so 110 is the 5-year average. So
Yes,
it's a 49. So that's roughly about 40% increase in the 5-year average. And how many of those do we think, or how many do we know how many of these allegations have been upheld?
No, so I don't have that data to hand in terms of this, but I'm very happy to have a look at that and to bring that back to you in terms of that.
Right, thanks. And again, this paragraph of the report keeps making reference to things being assessed to be the primary drivers. And I don't understand what that means. Greater Glasgow has been assessed to be the primary drivers. Is that just the geographical area? There just seems to be more cases. But what is the primary driver for more discriminatory allegations there in those geographical areas?
Yep. So again, I guess it's just identifying that's where we're seeing that increase, as one would anticipate potentially, you know, in terms of kind of, you know, larger city area and that type of area. So it's really just trying to identify, so then we can dig down and see if there is any further work or any trends or patterns that's emerging from that. If I can give you the reassurance, you know, that the numbers are extremely low in terms of the volume. So it really is just making sure that we're keeping and monitoring that trend.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that they're not all race allegations, but it's about 2% or so of all complaints, around about maybe 2+%. But this is a country with possibly 4% from people from ethnic minorities. So it's not necessarily, it's lower than the demographic, but not significantly, I would have said.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I think that's why it's so important we do keep that monitoring and that the trend analysis and continue to have a look at it. And again, and apologies, obviously, in terms of the volume of upheld for that question that you asked as well, we don't see any trends or patterns that outlie in terms of our kind of, you know, usual percentage in terms of the upheld element within that. So there's nothing that causes us concerns in terms of that. And I was really keen to give the committee the reassurance in terms of us continuing to monitor and review in terms of that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Paul. Fiona, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just 2 or 3 pieces of clarification, because I think some of the conversation we had at the action log element has helped shape some thinking here and close things off. Helen, just if I'm going to take them in different order, the race allegations. So I was interested in your use of language. You talked about complaints about racial discrimination and that you wanted to reassure and monitor and track and learn. I would have probably been more hopeful that it was you wanted to have a dialogue and with an aim to diminish to the lowest possible level the complaints, because actually just reassuring people, I'm not sure what you were reassuring them about.
Yeah.
If I may just come in, you know, sorry. So I absolutely see where you're coming from, Fiona. This is again an area, isn't it, where, because I've been having very sort of similar thoughts around what we discussed here. What we see at this end through these reports is almost the outcome, obviously, of all of the service delivery and the interactions of Police Scotland with the public. And so Helen's looking at it, obviously Police Scotland colleagues are looking at the data, and the question for me is almost, and I apologize for kind of bumping into your questioning, Fiona, but the question that I had is, what is the time lag? So by the time the complaints made it through to Helen and the analysis is undertaken, and so how timely are the feedback mechanisms is almost what we're kind of seeing here, because it's obviously not up to Helen to kind of fix the behavior that drives the complaints. But I think what is absolutely the role of the feedback mechanism through the complaints is to have that really timely influence on potentially some of the activities that do lead to the rise of that. So I suppose I don't know if that's aligned with what you were thinking, Fiona, that we really need to stem the activity that gives rise to the complaints. And I'm trying to understand how well that feedback mechanism works, with Helen providing that analysis.
Yeah, and Helen's already talked about upstream and prevention, which is really, really important. But again, I'm thinking about the proactivity and the intent being clearly articulated, that it may be that some of our other deep dive work will help us better with this language. But for me, I would be looking to see a reduction in the complaints there's an element of, while we're still working through this, we will see it going up, but at some stage in the future, we would be looking to say, you know, does a complaint about racial discrimination become a never event? Probably not, but does it become a lot less than it is just now, hopefully?
Yes, thank you. If I can come in, Chair, thank you. So I think that's when we know it's important that we continue to track it and monitor it over that time. What we will do is obviously that early triage through the NCARU unit, and that's really important that we can pull any patterns or matters out there, and then it's sent to the correct department within professional standards to then take forward in relation to if that is the complaint matter, if there is a criminal matter within it, and again give you that real reassurance that if there's any criminality within that, that's pulled out and taken across to that criminality team, criminal team, so that they can have that immediate look at it and then take that forward as we do need to with criminal allegations against police. So there's that early assessment part within it, but then obviously that also that opportunity that actually if there is learning and working with staff associations and working with others to identify that, we can then take that through the organisation where that needs to go, if that makes sense. But to give you the reassurance, there is that timely review and assessment of the matters as they come in.
Okay, and I think obviously we need evidence that it's happening, and I know that takes time, and we'll see that. Just, I think you've answered my question, Helen. You talked about engagement with the diversity staff associations, which is incredibly important, but that's not excluding the statutory staff associations such as the Police Federation, ASPs, trade unions. That's everybody, including the diversity staff associations.
Well, yes, no, very much, and we continue that engagement with them. Yes, the Federation were at our the diversity sort of staff association event that we ran, which was really positive because actually everybody has a role to play in these different elements. So I think that's really, really important in terms of that. And as I can, if I can just jump back as well, I have just reflected. Obviously, I do think it's really important. We would probably potentially have, expected to see that increase in matters coming in just in relation to the fact that the kind of the discussion around this, and actually I reflect that it's a positive if members of the public are coming to us to report these concerns, so that we can then reflect and learn from it. In a little bit like when we do see particular trends or patterns within the media, that does often reflect in terms of reports that are coming in. So actually the fact that we are seeing that is a positive, that people are having the confidence to come forward and report these, and then we can take forward that investigation or that matter and make sure it's appropriately dealt with within the organisation, just to give you that reassurance as well.
Yeah. No, fully understand that. Just a couple of other ones from me. The page 4, 33 misconduct hearings were scheduled, and then it looked to me as though there were 28 plus 13, which was 41 I looked at rather than 33. And I didn't know whether that was allegations were more than, but it said 33 cases. I'm just wondering if there's a mix, not a mix up, we're comparing apples with pears.
No, so what that relates to is we will show when there's more than one warning being given. So somebody might get a verbal, a written, or a different level of warnings. So it's mainly within the warnings area that actually it's not the exact count, the number of hearings, because more than one warning might be issued.
All right, okay. And then my final piece is about complaints about stop and search. I'm thinking that in terms of race as well as gender, and where we are with. And that I'm happy or content, at least, if we're seeing that will come through with a change in categorisation of complaints. But I'm interested, I'm not really understanding where the stop and search data is reported to. So the actual stop and search, I'm assuming, goes to policing and performance, but I'd be interested in where the complaints about that go to.
Fiona, Sister, do you want to come in on this point?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. If it's okay, I could answer that one. The stop and search data has been managed and overseen by the ACC for local police in West, which has been Steve Johnson, because they've had that ownership of the portfolio. There's been quite a lot of link in between ourselves and Steve about how we draw out the complaints for that. The complaints would still come to ourselves for investigation, but it's probably good to see that against the rest of the data for the number of stop and search carried out, again, what actually equates to become a complaint against the police. So that's a bit of work that we probably need to do along with APU to show that comparison, if that's okay. And it's maybe one that I would probably link in with my colleague can maybe come back with an answer to that at a later stage, because it's probably just it is a bit disjointed. I appreciate that, but it's probably the right way to do it to show that the violence reduction part is being under the one portfolio as well.
Thank you, Fiona. You satisfied with that? Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Paul, you still got your hand up? Another quick no? Legacy hand? Okay, very good. Right, any other questions or comments or observations from colleagues? I have got a couple of other questions as well. So obviously one which is very, very topical, and something that has been rehearsed at the last board session as well a few weeks ago is around the introduction of the Hate Crime and Public Order Act. Obviously, it was quite an event, and I was wondering if, and obviously, I appreciate that any rise in complaints related to the legislation won't necessarily have trickled through into the performance report just yet, because there's obviously that lag. But do you have an update? I mean, is there anything that you can tell us in terms of maybe, I appreciate it's not the full governance kind of data, but is there any anecdotal or management kind of, perspective you have on what the introduction of that legislation and the way that it has been managed, whether that's led to any kind of spikes in complaints from your perspective?
Thanks, Chair. If it's okay, I can answer this one. I sat as part of DCC Spears group for the hate crime legislation introduction, and overall, as it stands for us at the end of May, we had 57 complaints against the police, which included some which were relevant to the Hate Monster campaign, which had actually run the year before, if you may recall, but we included that in the figures because it did relate to the legislation. But about 22 of the 57 specifically related to the new Act, and out of those, we assessed that 12 were not relevant complaints, which brought us down to 10, which were seen as complaints against the police, but it was regarding the general theme being that a hate crime had occurred and the police had not dealt with it in an appropriate way. They had, confirmed it hadn't. So it's just that understanding of what was a hate crime under the new legislation. So a lot of work was done in relation to this and tied in with, for also my other area of my business, was a significant number of FOIs and subject access requests regarding hate crime as well. It's making sure that those, weren't tied in, weren't actually complaints against the police as well. So there's been quite a joint approach between the different portfolio areas to make sure that anything that was a relevant complaint regarding the the use of the legislation was really nailed down to make sure that we were capturing that. But so far out of those 10, those are being progressed, and some of those are ongoing. I think we did see a peak of demand to the police, as you know, and calls in, and some of those did end up coming towards the complaint side. But as you may be aware, some of the publication of the data that we put out, I think, did help with some of that and a greater understanding of what the new legislation actually meant.
Thank you. No, thank you for that comprehensive update. I really appreciate that. I think that's good. So what I'm taking from that, it's been well managed, and it's not necessarily led, from your perspective, to an increase in complaints per se, but there's obviously all the other kind of requests that also go through the PC department where there's been an impact.
Absolutely, and I think it's that crucial part of making sure we assess these complaints appropriately. And the fact is, the legislation is that collaboration of legislation, bringing it together and make sure that it was understood by those that were making the complaint and how relevant that complaint actually may have been. So that did take a bit of work to go through, but I must say was conducted very well.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Really appreciate that update. Good, right. Other than that, I suppose my kind of biggest observations to the report is, as I say, good data, better presentation. The data on timelines is really incredibly important, and I will save the discussion for when we have the full item 11 report. I think just as part of the private session to say, I also note that we've had the highest number of complaints to date. So there is, and we knew that was a trend we would picked it up, and you've been very transparent about this. The number of complaints is going up. Part of that is it an increased public trust that leads to that? Is it a deterioration in service? What is it? So it's multifactorial, and I appreciate it is difficult to kind of untangle that and really understand, is complaints going up? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I'm also looking at, obviously frontline resolution complaints versus the ones that go to investigation. So again, that's something that I think over time it would be good for us to have a further conversation around. Is frontline resolution good? Like what is acceptable? What would you expect? Is it moving in the right direction? And also around, and I know Fiona, obviously you've mentioned this already, it's around what are the percentages of complaints that are upheld versus the percentage of complaints that aren't upheld. And I feel that we are now in a position where we have almost the first set of data on all of these with sufficient granularity. So, so I think our conversation will continue in the committee, but also outside of the committee around what does good look like, because we have a first set of data, but we really need to understand, is this the best it can be? Can it be improved? Against these particular metrics, where do we want to get to over time? Where do you want to get to over time? And what might be some of the barriers that kind of stand in your way of getting there? So, but just in terms of really, presenting data and us kind of having a more informed discussion, absolutely. Since my time kind of joining the committee 18 months ago, I feel like it is like night and day in terms of our ability to really understand what's going on and scrutinizing that. So just again to record my thanks to you for not giving up and putting all of this really good work in. We're not finished, but we have a better set of data to start really scrutinizing and as I say, understanding what good looks like and where do we need to move to and what's realistic and what would it take maybe to move us to where we really want to be as well. So I hope colleagues are in agreement with that assessment. I don't see any growls or any expressions of dissatisfaction. So I will just assume that we're on the same page. Right, thank you so much for that. Really good discussion, and that allows me to move on to the next agenda item, which I believe is the SPA annual and quarterly performance report. And I believe, Darren, it's you who is talking to that.
Yep, thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues. So this is a regular SPA report which comes every quarter, including key statistics reflecting the position at the end of Q4 of last year, and with a comparison to the previous 7 quarters. Additionally, I have included an annual review of trends over the last 4 years, and unless colleagues would like to go into the quarterly report in more detail, my intention is to focus on the annual trend data by way of verbal updates. So in terms of recognising that the SPA typically receives low volumes of relevant complaints annually, generally, everything I'll say is in that context. So we are seeing a gradual decline in the number of relevant complaints as well as in allegations over time. The majority of relevant complaints do relate to senior officers, but again, in that context of low volumes more generally. The numbers in terms of senior officer complaints remained largely consistent until 22-23, at which point we received none. And in 23-24, the figure was certainly lower than had been the case in previous years. As you know, the authority is also responsible for handling of complaints related to the SPA and to forensic services. And from a high in 2019-20 over recent years, numbers have subsequently remained consistently low. Looking at the type of allegations, in terms of on-duty allegations, these remained broadly steady until a drop in 22-23, with the most recent year remaining low. And in terms of quality of service allegations, which are less individual specific, again, from a high in 2019-20, again, these have remained relatively low. Positively, I would note that in the last 2 years, in terms of complaint closure, all allegations have been addressed through early stage resolution, which, as you know, is around about complaints being able to be closed through the provision of apology, explanation, assurance without requirement for formal determination. In terms of our timescales and recognising that the authority have come quite some way since over a number of years, we may receive smaller numbers of complaints, but often these can be of the most complex, sensitive kind. But a lot of work had been done around about our processes in terms of ensuring timely resolutions. So from a high in terms of the average number of days to close complaints in 17-18 of 96, actually across the 5-year period you see before you, with the exception of 2021, average closure times have remained consistently below 40 working days, and the 2021 average was only marginally over. And in the last 2 years specifically, there were no cases that were closed out with the 40 working day target, 40 working days, 56 calendar days in terms of the PERC statutory guidance. The only other things I would want to call out in terms of the report from the covering report is we had reintroduced a process of quarterly dip sampling of Police Scotland closed complaints, which was has initially been undertaken with probably a narrower focus than originally recognised in the current PERC audit. Because of capacity challenges, particularly Police Scotland, the rollout of Centurion, it was agreed that we would postpone the most recent dip sample, and so the report that will come in September will incorporate a dip sample of both Q2 and Q3 of last year. We will also be engaging with the PERC in terms of the completion of its audit, in terms of expanding the scope of our dip sampling, recognising that we didn't want to duplicate whilst that was ongoing. The report also provides details of the most recent meeting of the National Complaint Handling Development Group that I referred to earlier on, and its meeting again in June. And then lastly, it refers to the benchmarking work that has been underway recently by myself and my team, which was essentially looking at public reporting of complaints and conduct performance data elsewhere within the UK. And yes, so the intention is, subject to engagement with the committee, to work into Police Scotland to share that that members have had, haven't had a chance to consider that report. So that was everything I intended to say. Again, happy to pick up on any specifics as well in terms of the quarterly report, but otherwise I'll stop there and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the reporting update, Darren. Really appreciate it. I'd like to open it up to colleagues for any questions. I was wondering, and thank you. I was wondering if you could maybe say a little bit more about and I'm going to get the name of it wrong now, though you've just said it. So the National Complaints Handling Development Group, Working Group. So what's in the agenda? What's the membership? What's in the agenda? And how do you see that kind of helping to drive the complaints handling process across the whole system going forward?
Certainly. So this is essentially a kind of practitioner working group. It's not a decision-making forum, and it's chaired by Police Scotland, with both ourselves and the PERC essentially in there as operating as critical friends, recognising the statutory functions of both the authority and the PERC in terms of complaints oversight. It also offers an opportunity as well for me in terms of our small team, recognising that we also handle a number of complaints as well. So kind of key areas of focus just now include, and the first one I would call it is linking into commentary from Lady Eilish in her report, which was, whilst complaints in relation to policing will be of a particular nature potentially, we should be open to learning from other areas, and so specifically the group will be engaging with the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman to look at any learning in terms of good practice, and also we're looking to engage with other policing bodies. So for example, and now I'm going to get the names wrong on one of them, so the Police Ombudsman of Northern Ireland, the IOPC, the Independent Office for Policing Complaints in England and Wales, and so apologies, the equivalent oversight body in the Republic of Ireland, it's not the Garda Síochána. Colleagues in Police Scotland will correct me, or the PERC in terms of the name of the organisation, but essentially the body that exists in the Republic of Ireland. So engaging in that respect. Other things that we're looking at around covering the report there in terms of how do we, recognition of some of the challenges around about volumes of complaints and capacity, and how do we kind of most transparently alert members of the public who are looking to make complaints about realistic timescales. What almost kind of if you go into an airport or a supermarket, some of the things that you talk about, current timescales to deal with a thing that allows people to have a kind of early understanding around about expectations there. I think that's a couple of things I would probably call out just now. Colleagues from PERC Police Scotland may want to comment, but essentially it's around about how do we, in a spirit of collaboration, seek to enhance our complaint handling performance. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Really helpful, Darren. Thank you so much. And part of the background for this question was obviously because, again, as rehearsed at the last SPA board meeting, we've had Fiona and myself, we've had the opportunity to appear in front of the Criminal Justice Committee to give evidence around the police ethics bill. And one of the questions asked by one of the members was around, it's complex. There seem to be lots of bodies involved in this, and does it need to be simplified, and how easy is it for a member of the public to understand what's going on? So that's why I'm really interested in the work of this group, because it's when practitioners come together and really clarify the roles, responsibilities, interactions, and this is just something really, from my perspective, is quite powerful. So I think it would be, I think at some stage I'd be really keen, maybe into the future, once obviously there's been that time to kind of develop some of the thinking, develop some of the initiatives. I think it would be really good to have that, again, come to the committee with an update, because it's the people who doing the doing who will often have the best insights into how the system can be improved and strengthened. And so really keen to kind of see that development. So thank you for the update. Really appreciate that. Okay, if there is no other comments or questions on this just now, I think we can move on to the next agenda item, which is over to our colleagues at PERC. That's the PERC annual and quarterly report on Police Scotland handling of complaints, investigation, referrals. And I believe it's Raymond and Ilya who will be doing their double act as usual. So I'm not too sure who is going to go first.
Good morning, Chair. I suppose my section appears first in the report, so if that's okay with the committee, perhaps I can take the lead on this.
Perfect.
Fantastic. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee. I'll present our annual update the report contains information on Q4 as well as the overall annual figures. I think in terms of Q4, from the complaint handling perspective, I don't think there is any significant highlights from the report. You will see that the number of the applications we received in Q4 has increased and it was on par with the number of the applications we received in Q1. So after a small dip in Q2 and 3, the number of the applications have picked up again. Overall, for previous year, you'll see the number of the application in the region of 250 applications remains steady from the previous financial year again. The report has highlighted that there has been changes to our internal procedures this financial year, and in terms of the timescales that we asked Police Scotland to provide the police complaint files to us. Overall, almost 90% of all police papers requests, the papers were provided within the requested timescales. On average, I noted just under 9 working days. So that's certainly very positive. And I think overall we made 237 paper requests to Police Scotland. So that certainly assists us to with a very efficient, quick, early assessment of the cases, and that's appreciated. During the complaint handling reviews, we've made additional 151 information requests. So that's generally relating to the information that was missing from the complaints files. On average, the information was provided within 14 working days, again, within the agreed timescales, which is positive. But overall, I think discussions already taking place to try to improve the content of the police complaints file, just to make sure that all the information that should be there is there from the very start, and that would certainly assist us in completing our complaint handling reviews more timelessly. We issued 156 CHR reports this year, covering well in excess of 700 individual allegations, a decrease of about 20% on the previous financial year. But I think the report explains that we're putting more focus and utilization of the discretionary decisions, which are the most appropriate way to proceed with some of the perhaps lower level complaints that come to us for a review. Generally, you will see that the number of complaints that we deem to be handled to a reasonable standard was 57%, which is a drop from the previous 3-year average of 71%. The report indicates that there is a level, some mitigation there in this respect. Naturally, with a greater utilization of the discretionary decision, there will be an effect on the number of complaints we have taken for a review, and the knock-on effect on the figure of reasonable, not reasonable. We consider that potentially the mitigation may be in the region of 5% swing. So that's just a slightly different approach this year by the PERC, looking to focus our resources on the most complex, the most difficult complaints, whilst dealing efficiently with complaints that could be progressed through by exercising our discretion. What I would say is, in terms of the discretionary decisions letters that we issue, those will still contain feedback to Police Scotland where we feel that is appropriate, and in some instances there may still be learning points identified, albeit the matter does not progress through a full review. You will note that this year we've made 259 recommendations to Police Scotland. I suppose the most significant highlight, you will see an increase of insufficient inquiries recommendations, which now has risen to 48%. So that's really perhaps one of the trends that we've noticed this year. For the last financial year, we've identified 90 learning points. And the report has identified certain common trends in terms of learning that we have identified. Primarily, those focus on the complaint inquiry officers having more meaningful engagement with the complainants at the start of the process, to ensure that the crux of the complaint and the real cause of the dissatisfaction of the complainer is appropriately captured, and thereafter that the complaint inquiry can focus on those issues that are most important to the complainer. Thereafter, we'll provide a summary of our annual engagement with the Police Scotland and other policing bodies. I suppose the key highlight from the last financial year, you'll see that we've now set up practitioners forums, which have now taken place at the end of April. Those have arisen following a liaison event in January that we held at the PERC, together with PSD. And as I say, the practitioner forums are very focused, let's say, and ultimately they take place in different regions. So PSD North, PSD West and PSD East will have their specific workshops set up. We've held the first round of this event. The feedback is very positive, and I believe that these forums will have a real positive effect on the overall complaint handling within the PSD. Work is ongoing in relation to the implementation of the recommendations from the Encaro audit. I note that DCC Spears asked to postpone the update on the implementation, which is probably very appropriate, because whilst we're close to getting a majority of the recommendations over the line, there's still a little bit of work remains outstanding there. But I'm confident by the next meeting the committee should have a very comprehensive update from Police Scotland in that regard. And as the committee might be aware, the 6-stage audit is now completed. The report is with Police Scotland for factual checking, but I anticipate that it will be issued soon, and we perhaps be in a position to discuss it in more detail at the next meeting. And as Darren mentioned, the work of the National Complaint Handling Development Group is continuing. Certainly the PECS bill provisions, or perhaps implications of the new provisions, certainly will be a matter for discussions, as well as the audit work, implementation of the recommendations from there, and also the child-friendly complaint handling model with the new legislation coming into force in July. Certainly we're looking to see what needs to be done to make sure that the PERC, Police Scotland, and perhaps the SPA are fully compliant with the new legislation. And that's perhaps concludes my update in relation to the complaint handling section of our report.
Thank you very much, Ilya. Shall we take comments on this part of the PERC update before we launch into the ferals? Are there any questions from members or any observations? Fiona, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ilya. That was really, really helpful. I'm interested in the referring back to after the complaints handling review, you refer them back to Police Scotland with recommendations. Do you then follow up to determine whether or not you're content with the response from Police Scotland?
Yes, Fiona, absolutely. Every recommendation is recorded, and the case remains open until the recommendation is implemented. Within the Professional Standards Department, there is I don't know if it's the formal name, but there is certainly a CHR team and a group of individuals who take care of all our recommendations. So there are specific individuals within different regions. So we have a very good liaison with those officers, and every recommendation effectively, the case does not get closed until the recommendation is implemented. And to ensure that the implementation is of good standard, Professional Standards Department will always run the proposed further responses to the complainers by the PERC, and once that's approved, the further responses are issued to the complainers. Generally speaking, and I know that the new legislation will put the recommendations on a more formal footing, but I can advise that, you know, if we're looking in, you know, 2021, 2022, and probably 2023 as well, the implementation rates are in a very high 90% odd. We're talking about 98, some years 100% implementation. So that aspect of the CHR process, in my view, works very well, and is certainly, yeah. I'm a great believer that if you make a recommendation, then you know you need to see it through, because otherwise it becomes not effective.
Okay, thanks, Ilya. Thanks, Chair. And just a comment, I think it's encouraging to see learning points also be focusing on good practice, which is, I think, incredibly important. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. No, absolutely, agreed. Okay. So I suppose the biggest observation for me, and there's absolutely no kind of getting away from that, is that the percentage drop in the number of complaint handling reviews where the complaint has been assessed as handled to reasonable standard. You know, particularly because yeah, I think you said from obviously down from 71 last year down to 57. So it's kind of since about roughly around 60% kind of have been found to have been handled to reasonable standard, which still leaves a substantial proportion of the ones where that was not deemed to be the case. And I again appreciate you said that there are some kind of mitigating factors around that, but I think, you know, ultimately there's kind of no getting away from that. That is still quite a high percentage. So, you know, I would really welcome kind of some of your views, but also obviously from Police Scotland, just around how you know, because obviously this is, for us, this is a really critical bit of data just now. So if we assume that the process as it is on paper is appropriate, and again, once we're going to have the 6-stage investigation audit, when that will give us some more insight into the design adequacy of the process. But at this stage, you know, I think back, you know, obviously the complaints have been taken to a national complaints handling model, which again absolutely makes sense on paper. And I'm just really keen to kind of understand whether or not, you know, so the fact that 40% still could have been handled to a better standard by the national team, I wonder how can we obviously increase that number, you know, because we want a much higher percentage to be found to have been handled to a reasonable standard. Appreciate it's a relatively, out of all the complaints that are being handled by Police Scotland, it is a relatively small subset. There's likely to be some people who kind of self-selecting into that, you know, because again, you don't get a representative sample of all the complaints that you review. It's only the people who decide to take it to PERC. So I am basically trying to understand what does this number tell us around the actual operational efficiency of the complaints handling process overall. You know, really keen to understand from Police Scotland, to what degree are you concerned about that, about the trend kind of down again, and what are your thoughts around what are the action plans, the thoughts around making it better and increasing that percentage, you know, because ideally I think we would all want that percentage to be much higher. So just really keen to kind of explore that a little bit. I don't know if Ilya, you want to go first, or Helen, if you want to come in. Sorry, short straw.
Ladies first. No, Ellen, I'm happy to maybe come in here with some of my observations. I think there has been a period of time, I think where perhaps the training element and the specific complaint handling training for complaint handlers within PSD was perhaps not as coordinated and not as regular. So that matter is now addressed with the PSD induction course, where you know, ourselves, I believe the SBA, perhaps the investigations team within the PERC, also the external speakers attend as a 4-day course, I believe. And the course is now being held every 6 months. And recently we discussed about, you know, maybe running some additional training sessions for individuals who didn't manage to get onto the last one in April. Now that will be a very significant in terms of improving the overall complaint handling, because I think in the past, certainly, you know, even looking at some of the feedback we had in the joint audit of Nkaru with the SBA team, that, you know, some of the individuals within the Nkaru team did not have, you know, the required training. So that element, there is certainly, you know, the introduction of this new training course will increase the quality of police complaint handling. I have no doubt about that. The practitioners' forums are probably key, and that's my key strategy for this financial year, because it allows us direct contact, you know, direct discussions with complaint handlers, because in many instances it is about complaint handlers fully understanding the PERC statutory guidance, what is required in terms of that guidance, what our expectations are as an oversight body in terms of police complaint handling. So those two elements, those two kind of strands, pieces of work, I have no doubt will have a significant effect on the reasonable, not reasonable percentage during this financial year. So that's probably the key areas where we will focus. But I'll maybe let Helen come in and complement my input.
Yes, no, thank you very much. And I think you've covered a number of the points that I would, in terms of that training element in which you've covered, and that's really important. And we're really, really keen to continue to build on that, reflect on that, and work with PERC just to make sure that we're sharing that learning and that information, and then implementing that into our training. I guess a couple of observations, as has been commented, it is a low number that come for the CHR process, 2.1% last year in terms of that, but clearly we are looking as much as possible to bring that number back up in terms of that percentage of handled, kind of reasonably within that. I do know, I think the first 6 months, there was a number of very challenging, complex ones that actually brought our number down, or that percentage down, at the start of the year. And then we have seen a gradual increase. I believe at the moment we're sitting for May at 72%, which is positive for May for us. And I think it shows the training in October and the recent, kind of the impact of that, and the importance of us continuing in terms of that. So we're very committed to continuing that training program, just to make sure that we are investing in our complaint handlers in terms of that, so that we have that opportunity to bring that number back up in terms of those that are handled to a reasonable standard.
That's really helpful. Thank you both, Ilyan and Helen, for really kind of providing your views and some narrative around that, because it's a trend we don't want to see, and really keen to understand what can be done to reverse that. So that's really helpful. Actually, the conversation there just triggered something else, if you just indulge me just for a second there. Obviously, in a lot of other kind of case handling functions or complaint management functions, what quite often happens is that, what comes to PERC is a small number, and it's a selection of cases. People self-select into that. Obviously, in a lot of other service type environments, there will be additional internal checks undertaken by management over what the case handlers or complaint handlers are doing as well. And certainly I've seen a number of models where before somebody is so there is a route to competence for people. Again, that links us to training, to really understanding the guidance, so that basically a member of staff or an officer who's doing case management work, their work is being checked. A regular percentage of that is being checked by somebody else for quality, and it's only after they've reached a certain kind of pass rate that they're that's you fully competent. And so just quite a standard route to competency type kind of process. And I have to admit, sort of, I do. There's a certain level of ignorance on my part as to, I'm not sure. In fact, I'm not sure to what degree that is in place in Police Scotland. I know we've had some of these conversations. And I'm not saying that that's always the most appropriate way to approach this. And I know that that's, again, sort of supplemented by some of the dip sampling work that we do. But actually, just, from a management perspective, I think it would be quite good to consider if there is something like, particularly considering all investment into training, practitioner working groups, if there is something, around kind of route to competence type program that could be introduced. I'm not going to be committing you to anything with the committee, obviously, just now, but in all honesty, in all seriousness, this is something that needs to be considered as to whether it is proportionate or not. Sort of is a different question, but if we are really serious about improving, really the robust application of the complaint handling process, we really need to understand what will be required to get us to where we need to get to in terms of, as I say, the efficiency of the process. So I don't know, Helen, if you want to comment at this stage.
I guess just
on any of these musings.
Yeah, no, I guess just to give the reassurance, obviously, in terms of the line manager's oversight, support to our complaint handlers, and in terms of the commitment to the training, and then to the review and reflection, along with the other work that happens around the DIP sampling, and clearly picking up on any kind of points of learning or improvement. That forms part of our sort of continuous improvement that we try to deliver in terms of that. So I appreciate that maybe doesn't fully answer your question, but hopefully gives you some reassurance around those processes, and then the communications that we have with PERC in order for us to be able to sort of reflect and have those conversations and carry out that. But we're always looking at about how we can develop that and learn from that and improve from that as well, because I think the points that you put out are completely right in terms of how we want to develop and move forward.
Thank you. Fiona, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just bouncing back to Ilya, please, and protected characteristics. I'm making the bold assumption that when Police Scotland has an analysis of complaints by protected characteristic, that will then feed back into yours, or how are you going to approach that within PERC?
Thank you, Fiona. I think within PERC we certainly collect our own data in terms of equality and diversity, and that's obviously looked at internally. The question hasn't certainly arisen as yet because we haven't had a set of data from Police Scotland as yet. I'm aware that the new forms that are being designed certainly will have some data on it. When the data is available, certainly it's something that we will look at in detail, and then look at it from the policy perspective, just to see what data tells us in terms of the sections of the society that perhaps do not come forward to make the complaints, maybe section of the society that make certain types of the complaints and why they make those complaints. So certainly once that data starts coming through from Police Scotland, it certainly will open further avenues for us to do a little bit more research and a little bit more policy work. Unfortunately, up to this stage, certainly hasn't been able to do so without this data. But certainly the data internally within PERC is collated. All applicants are asked to submit this information voluntarily, and we'll look at it to see how what it tells us and what we need to do to make sure that we're as inclusive as we can be.
Okay, and would any of that be of relevance to the committee, do you think, in terms of percentage of people from a Black minority ethnic community, perhaps, whose complaints are going back for complaint handling review, or is that level of analysis too complex?
We can certainly look into it, Fiona. Yeah, we can maybe have a discussion about it. I think it would be important to have something to compare it against, because you can appreciate that having received 252 applications for CHR, obviously not everybody will submit the equality and diversity data. So although I would say that with our enhanced forms and the new website and automated process, the percentage of return forms has certainly increased dramatically. So there is certainly more meaningful data set just now. But it is difficult to put our data into some sort of context or perspective if we don't have the overall data of all Police Scotland's complainers. So it probably would make sense to get both sets of data and then perhaps look at it in a little bit more detail.
Okay, thanks, Ilya. Thanks, Chair.
Katrina, did you want to come in there? So you had your hand up and then lowered it again.
Well, as usual, I was just wanting to clarify that we're talking about, a range of minorities or protected characteristics or whatever, not just, one or two. So disability, hidden disabilities, so on.
Absolutely. No, we'll have to look at everything. I think naturally, certain issues become hot topics, in the society and in the media. But there are other, vulnerable groups that perhaps we don't hear from as often, but they're just as important. So we've got to make sure that, whilst we looking at the very hot issues, making sure that those are addressed and we deal with them sensitively, but also not forget about individuals who are vulnerable and perhaps do not make as much I don't want
It's all right, I know what you're trying to say. I think we all know what you're trying to say. I think what you're saying is actually an extremely important point, because quite often things do appear to be reactive, and sometimes it takes quite tragic or very media alerted kind of things to happen, but actually there's smaller tragedies happening all the time. So or less reported tragedies rather than smaller ones, I should say. So no, I'm really pleased to hear you saying that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, Katrina, got your hand up, but did you want to? Okay, perfect. Thank you. No, thank you for that, Katrina. Thank you. Yeah, the message is loud and clear, and it's good to have the reassurance that in fact wider protected characteristic data is kind of captured as part of your capture of protected characteristics information. So that's good. Okay, I see no further comments on this, so I think with that it's over to you, Raymond, then, to your part of the PERC update.
Thank you. Morning again, Chair. Morning all. I'll keep it brief. I'll take the document as read, and I'll probably focus the committee to page 2 of our document. It's changed slightly, and you'll see there's some high-level data there, the executive summary. So I'll probably focus on that if that works best for yourselves. So over the last year, 823 referrals to PERC in relation to Police Scotland. 429 of them were Police Scotland referrals. You'll be aware Crown matters supersede Police Scotland ones, so that figure would be higher when it comes to deaths and Article 3 referrals, and now Article 5 as was touched on. So from the 429 Police Scotland only referrals, that resulted in 26 investigations. So the conversion rate there is about 6%, but I think that's testament to the ongoing communication, the professional communication that goes on a daily basis between PERC staff and their assessment unit, and the PSD staff who act as a spoke into these Police Scotland investigations. And I touch on the comment ACC Houston made there about the ability to expedite that information, probably the ongoing learning that goes through that with Police Scotland, understanding what we actually need to make that informed assessment, professional assessment, to make sure that we can then prioritise those matters that require to go to the sort of more in-depth investigation, if you like. So that's testament to that ongoing interaction between both parties. When you distill that down into the last quarter, there was 118 referrals, which converted into 10 investigations. So you'll note a slight uptick there, but I can probably give a bit of context around about that. As detailed in the document, there was 2 firearms related matters that we explored in relation to the reasoning that's documented in the report. That was new types of deployments there, so we felt the need to look at that in particular, and also as part of an ongoing piece of work we embarked on in relation to use of force against children and vulnerable persons. We looked at 4 matters relating to PAVA use involving children. 2 of them remain ongoing, but the other 2 have been completed, and it's very much to give that sort of trust and confidence in Police Scotland's use of that particular tactic against children. So it is positive in that regard, but it allows us to understand that particular area of Police Scotland's involvement and the use of that equipment against children. So nothing concerning to see there at this time, so it just gives that confidence round about that. So in terms of the investigations, primarily the ones that come here are serious injury following police contact, the direct ones from Police Scotland. And again, nothing I would like to highlight in that, or indeed any other matters around about Taser or PAVA that would give us any concern in terms of any spikes there, whether it be in the last quarter or indeed against the last 12 months. The point that we did touch on at the last committee was in relation to the recommendations and the fact that some of them had quite long timescales and were ongoing. We reflected in the fact that a lot of them were complex and timeless in terms of trying to move from the recommendations from PERC into operationalising that in the police setting. So as a result of the conversation at the last meeting, we have now got in place with PSD a monthly meeting so that we can support that process to ensure that Police Scotland fully understand what our recommendations mean in an entirety, and we can support any sort of narrative going forward to enable them to take them on board and consider them. So that engagement is absolutely welcomed and has seen some early dividends, and we're now able to report in this document, as you'll see, some partial updates there as we move towards the sort of final one. So that is encouraging for us and allows us to move forward with some key topics to ultimately improve that service delivery to the public, I suppose. So that's a really key piece of work ongoing there. As we move into this year, coming out of last year, you'll be aware that Article 5 is now in play, which essentially is unlawful arrest, which we would not anticipate having a great deal of volume surrounding that. And we've got specific guidance from COPFS around about thresholds, which is welcome. In terms of that sort of piece moving forward as well, in touch with progressive sort of tactics, we'll welcome the body-worn cameras, which I think will only enhance our ability to assess in a timeous manner the referrals that come in for Police Scotland, because that's a real positive step forward. So we understand that will be in the second half of this year, and it'll only enhance our ability to engage with Police Scotland and understand what's truly happened in these situations that come to our attention. So all positive in that regard. In terms of the sort of softer piece, the stakeholder engagement between Police Scotland and Park, Elias touched on most of it. There's sort of joined up development sessions across the year between PSD and Park, both from the reviews and investigations side into PSD. So that enables us to take forward learning sort of development areas to ensure our sort of work going forward is progressive in nature. And also the ongoing training that we can support with Police Scotland, and in reverse of that, how they can support some of our development around about the specific areas. So that's welcomed as well. But in general, I would say a very positive engagement, which enables us to understand and expedite these referrals, and then where necessary, progress them in investigation during not only the last quarter, but the last 12 months. I'd probably just leave it in that and open up to any questions if there was any.
Thank you very much. Raymond, can I just open it up to members to see if there are any questions or observations on this update? No? Perfect, thank you. And thank you for kind of touching on the recommendations, Raymond. I suppose if I understand you correctly, so lots of really good work around there, kind of in terms of making sure that Police Scotland, everybody understands, everybody's on the same page, things are moving at pace and as quickly as they can. I think also from a reporting perspective, I think I note that from one quarter to the next quarter, if some of the recommendations where there is yet no response, or I believe no agreement, it's kind of response awaited, but then the next quarter I think we receive a new fresh set of recommendations. So maybe there's just something there around, but we don't necessarily see what's happened to the ones that weren't agreed yet at the previous quarter, if I'm correct. So there may be a little bit there just around the presentation of data, because at the moment it seems like we kind of go quarter to quarter, but it almost feels like there's a proportion of those recommendations that fall through the cracks, where we're not necessarily quite sure what's happened, if that agreement has been made, sort of, into the next quarter. I'm not sure if I'm making myself very clear, but or maybe if I'm misinterpreting the way the data is presented, but it would just be really quite good that every recommendation made, that we know at some stage what's happened to it. So maybe if that's something you could look into.
So I understand what you're saying in terms of the conversion of recommendation to outcome. It is pretty much there, and you'll note there is ones where we have, say, if you look at the last page, page 25 of our report, there's two that will be rescinded because we became aware of information that wasn't previously provided to us. So I suppose it's there. It's potential in terms of how we present it. So I'll take that away and see if there's a more suitable manner in which we could represent that, just to give you and the committee the confidence that when the recommendations are actually converted to an outcome, it is signposted here, and the ones that are midway through and the ones that are pending. So there may be a bit of reflective work that I could take away to see how we could revise our sort of presentation of that, if you like.
That would be excellent. That's exact spot on. That's what I'm after. So no, thank you for that. That's really good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, right. Well, I can see no other questions or comments for our colleagues from PERC. My only kind of outstanding request is that once the audit into the 6-stage process is complete, maybe if we could have circulation of that to the committee members. You know, I would quite like us to kind of get as early visibility of that as possible once that's obviously finalized, so that we can then discuss it at the committee, at the next committee. But, you know, rather than kind of wait until it coming in the papers for the next committee, I would really appreciate seeing it as quickly as we can. And I see here nodding, so thank you for that. Right, which means we're finished with this agenda item. Apologies, colleagues, this is really some bad chairmanship here because we are running kind of slightly behind our schedule, but I'm very conscious of the fact that it's 5 minutes past 12. I had hoped originally to maybe get through the public part of the agenda and then give us a little bit of a break, but I appreciate I can't keep you up probably at your desks any longer. So that might give rise to complaints that we don't necessarily want to increase the workload. Sorry, really bad joke. I really clearly need a break just now. So I would suggest maybe that we do take a break now for about 30 minutes. Is that okay to just give people a proper break and ability to have some lunch? Is that amenable? And then we can come back at about 35 past, finish the last 2 public agenda items and then launch into the private session. Is that okay? I think that's probably the most humane thing to do at this stage. Thank you so much for bearing with us this morning. Right, okay, excellent. I shall see you all at 35 minutes past the hour and we'll continue with our session. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Chair.
question?
We have to wait for, well, Fiona's there,
sorry.
so we are for it.
Thank you, Paul. Fiona's there as well. Very good. Right. I am keen to finish this on time, so I'm trying to catch up on time. Colette, you'd like to come in?
Yeah, just for your awareness, Chair, PIRC colleagues have had to leave the call, so we don't need to hold up for them.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you for letting me know. Good. Okay, right. I think we can delve into the next agenda item, which is the Police Scotland Professional Boundaries report for discussion. I'm not sure if it's Stuart or Helen who are speaking to that.
Yep. Thank you very much. Oh, it's myself that is going to cover this matter. So I won't go over all of the detail within the paper, but just to give a very quick overview, the paper seeks to provide an update to the committee in relation to the review of sexual circumstances, matters of complaints and conduct that was carried out between 2017 and October 2021. So this obviously looked at matters that have been reported to Police Scotland in relation to officers and staff across the organisation, and a paper was previously brought to the committee detailing the 19 recommendations and the progress that had been made against them. This paper seeks to provide a further update in relation to the remaining 3 matters that were ongoing, and also outline the areas of sort of monitoring and review or evaluation in which we're carrying out in terms of the work. So I'll just stay with that part of the paper, which talks about, as I say, the 19 recommendations, 16 which have previously been reported to the committee as complete. There are currently 2 that are in progress as longer term bits of work, and 1 that is being considered within another work stream and continues to develop. So the first one of these looked at the implementation of the annual integrity check. So that's been picked up as part of the vetting and integrity SOG, which I know ACC Houston is going to be speak about under the next item, and links to some of the work that's come out of the HMICS review of vetting as well. So that's discussions within there. The second recommendation relates to misconduct in public office, and that's a wider bit of work that is continuing, and we are engaging with the Scottish Government in respect of that and the future opportunities around specific legislation linked to misconduct in public office. The third recommendation looked at the sort of the proactive support and interventions programme. So this links with our sort of early intervention work that we do with officers when there's a sort of a number of complaints that are raised in respect of them. So developing that a little bit further, and we're just looking at sort of technical solutions linked to Centurion in relation to that work. So those were the 3 recommendations that remained outstanding. In terms of measures of success, we've looked at the sort of confidence in reporting in terms of that, and obviously we did see a marked increase in the number of referrals in relation to sexual misconduct, indicating that increased confidence to report these matters. We looked at the welfare support as well, and obviously kind of monitoring and tracking in terms of that, but that included the investigation well-being guidance and development of good practice, and welfare checklists as well, and then also the investigative process, which ensured that sort of element of independence, the discussions between ourselves and sort of specialist crime division, public protection teams in relation to allegations, and ensure that independence, transparency, and the referral into CAPD or fiscal in relation to that at an early stage. So those were some of the measures that we looked at in relation to that. My final 2 points just relate to the fact that we have started a new review of matters from that previous review through till the 21st of January. So that review is currently ongoing, and again, the expectation will be that further recommendations will come to that clearly we would bring back to this committee as well. And in addition to that, we have also carried out a review of police perpetrated domestic abuse cases between January 2020 and January 2020 and the 31st of January 2023. So this piece of work meant that we have reviewed 188 cases during that period, and 14 recommendations have been identified and brought forward, which have now gone through the professionalism and assurance group and are at the stage of being allocated out for progression. These recommendations are listed in the paper, and they cover sort of, that sort of victim engagement and support, training, the investigation, and sort of well-being, and just how that's weaved through. So as I say, the 14 recommendation that we are now taking forward, and will clearly commit to bringing back a further update on those, working very closely with our colleagues in the Domestic Abuse Task Force in respect of that. So that's a very quick overview of the paper.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that. Good paper. I would like to open it up to colleagues for any questions or observations that they may have on this particular agenda item. Obviously, there's a lot of work, and it's really good from my perspective. It's really good to see the recommendations outlined in there. Sorry, I'm just skipping between documents here on my screen. So yeah, it's really good. What I think is, so if I take us back, so because I think this report, yeah, really useful update. Good to see some of the longer terms actions and how they're actually linked in with other pieces of work as well. I think at the last committee report, at the last committee meeting that we had, I think Katrina made the point that, so there's obviously this piece of work, but there are also other pieces of work. And I think this report does link that somewhat together. But I think there was the thrust of the conversation that we had was around, is it possible to see when some of the stuff will be landing? So, so is it possible to see, I think, the different strands of activity and there's obviously different strands of activity, there's different action plans, and then when they will be landing, because I think the timelines is the last bit that's possibly still a little bit missing in the overall picture. And it was purely, again, it was, I think, again, if I remember back the conversation, it was around just illustrating that there has been a fair bit of due diligence done in this area. So that's hugely positive. And there's learnings, and tangible actions are coming out in the back of that. And it's just bringing that all together into a slightly bigger picture. Katrina, if I remember correctly, that was the thrust of your comment from last time round. And whilst I think this paper kind of does get us, it gives us, I think, some of the detail. It's and when may we see some of this landing? I think that's possibly still not 100% clear. Helen, does that make sense?
Yes, no, definitely. I think, the three outstanding recommendations that we've got from the previous review, they do continue as, kind of long-term bits of work, and a little bit out of our control, albeit clearly we're trying to, push forward and certainly involve and progress the discussions around this as well. So I can clearly we can commit to bringing back the update in relation to these, and I would now add on that sort of update in relation to the domestic review as well that was carried out, and again, sort of timescale wise, as I say, they've literally just been allocated out. So once the owners have had a good time to review and identify kind of quite the actions that come within the recommendations, we will certainly then be able to bring that back. But we were keen to show you how we are continuing to work through the recommendations, link it to our newer review of sexual misconduct as well. And again, that will be something that we'll be able to bring back to the committee in the future.
No, and absolutely. I think your point is really well made. So I do think you've provided the update on the recommendations and now longer term. So I understand that it's a cyclical thing as well. So it's difficult to kind of say, well, this is when this whole thing is going to be completed, because, as you say, it's out of your control. I think it's more. It feels a little bit like you're underselling, I think, some of the activity that went into space, because that's the conversation we had last time round, is because we only ever kind of get sort of like bitty updates on this. It's like, oh, this has happened. I think it was more from in terms of giving that full picture from a public confidence perspective, that actually these are some of the things that have already been discharged. These are some of the things that have been mainstreamed. So to use a consultant speak, i.e. they now form part of the business as usual. And these are the longer term things. Okay, progressing, not entirely sure when. And now, as you say, now there's the additional set of recommendations which I think are incredibly valuable, certainly from my perspective, from the domestic abuse review. So without, I think, kind of wanting to create a massive burden around this for you in terms of reporting thing, it's it feels a little bit like it might not quite give us the full picture, because we've seen it over the course of a time and also the different bits. This is the last installment of it. Katrina, do you feel strongly about kind of having that overall picture? I'm sorry, apologies for putting you on the spot, but I do remember, you know, it was your point from last time around really well made, and I'm just trying to understand whether or not this kind of satisfies what you were thinking about when we had the conversation, or because I'm also mindful, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to be asking Police Scotland to be coming back to us with papers, because we have had the assurance. So as I say, I'm satisfied that it is progressing, but it was just about kind of really publicizing the overall impact of this piece of work, because it's not just a review, that it's I just think this is one of those things that where it's worked really well, going back, doing the extra work, and then implementing it into really tangible recommendations. So are we doing it justice, you know, I suppose, in terms of the presentation of it?
I think that's the point, because I seem to remember saying something along those lines about you're almost underselling yourself. You know, that it's about actually really kind of, celebrating, publicising, the work that is going on. So yes, just to back up what you're saying, Katerina, and it's not about a criticism. It's actually about, it's the opposite in a way. But see, Fiona, I'm going to quickly get myself back off the hook, because I can see you've got your hand up, Fiona. Sorry, Chair.
Fiona. No, that's all. Fiona, what's your views?
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of things. Are we as a committee going to get a bit more granular detail and evidence of what was found, and in practical terms, evidence of assurance that we'll take things forwards? But I also wonder about that bigger picture, the narrative and the description from a public openness and transparency point of view. Whilst I recognise the need for confidentiality, I think it would be important that we're getting reports and we're following the timeline, but actually a position paper of things that were found, things that we'll do better next time, and the expectation that we have that things will improve. Both, so maybe a more detailed one for us privately, but actually for the public, I would wonder if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Fiona. And I suppose, so the more detailed one is a separate point, and that was absolutely an observation I had as well. That obviously for the sexual misconduct, we did have that more deeper dive in the private session, and it would be absolutely, I agree with Fiona, it would be beneficial to have some of that for the domestic cases as well, because I will assume the data is available. You've done the analysis, so it's just giving us some more insight into maybe some of the more specifics, again, just to make sure that we do get under the skin of it. And yeah, and when it comes to that, the as Fiona, very, very beautifully said, a bit of a position paper, potentially, and maybe not even just for the committee, maybe I'm overthinking this, but I know obviously you've got your standard where a lot of the stuff is being reported, so it's just a useful bit of comms. And there may well be linkages into some, rather than just outside of the remit of this committee, there may well be linkages into policing together, and into some of the broader strategic themes as well. It's just, I do believe the effort that went into doing these reviews and crystallizing all the recommendations and working through them is good, but because of the kind of bitty nature of the reporting, I think that's probably what's coming out. So mindful of not wanting to kind of give you more work to do for the sake of giving you work to do, but this is, I think the feeling across the committee is that this is critical for public confidence, and you're potentially selling it a little bit short. So maybe there is a bit of a compromise of pulling that together into this is what we've done and this is the journey we've been on. Fiona, what do you think? Before I let Helen respond.
So yes, I think that would be good. I have another thought, and you maybe have already told us this, and apologies for the question if you have. Where do the complainants come into this? So what we're saying is, we know there's learning, so in brackets, we could have done better, but we've already concluded a complaint, and therefore the complainant perhaps has been one of those that have been left dissatisfied, not comfortable with it, but has just let it go, or has nowhere else to go. There's an ethical issue here about, I think it probably is transparency. And do you bring back bad memories? I don't know. So I'd be interested to know, A, have you told us already, but B, what you're doing about it.
Very good point. Sorry, Helen. Lots of thoughts were there for you to reflect on and to come back to us on.
And very happy to do that. We can take that away and see it. And what we were really keen to do is to provide as much as we can within this public session, so that we can show the work that's happening. Again, as you say, that there is the detail behind the recommendations. If I take the domestic case review in respect of that, so why don't we can have a look at that, potentially bring something back to the private session that we could have a discussion on, and then just see how we could work that through in terms of it. But there certainly is lots of work ongoing within this area, as you've reflected, and I am very keen to communicate that as best we possibly can in terms of that. And I think just in particular in relation to the point in relation to the complainer and the person behind these elements of that, and obviously that's something that we're very aware of throughout, and that's one of the reasons that we obviously try and balance the sort of the private or the information that's shared within it. So again, that's something that we can reflect on.
So, sorry, Chair, if I may, so are we notifying the complainants that we're reviewing the handling of their complaint or not?
So most of these elements we'll look at when it's the domestic abuse, if we take that one, will be related to in terms of the criminal investigation that has worked through. So a review of the criminal investigation, a review of the statements, and then a review in terms of the actions. So in terms of that direct contact, I think I don't think that's routinely done as part of the review. But again, that's something that I'll take away and speak to the team just about how we could factor that in if it's appropriate to in the circumstances. Because that there could be some other learning in terms of that. So that's something that we can certainly reflect on moving forward.
Okay, I'm just thinking about candour and the whole dialogue that we've been having about candour recently. So thanks, Helen. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you both. Good. Okay. I see no. Oh, Darren, you've got a.
Yeah. Apologies, Chair. I just wanted to just clarify a point in relation to an earlier action, which was proposed for closure, and members have closed that. But it was just when we had an ad hoc report came to the last committee specifically around about complaints and conduct matters containing a sexual circumstance, and there was a request from the committee to introduce regular reporting in that space. So it was just to note that the update we've had just now is in terms of specific sort of deep dive reviews, and recognising there is a kind of follow-on review that's taking place just now in terms of complaints and conduct matters containing a sexual circumstance. So it was just to note notwithstanding the closure of the action, it would be the intention to engage with Police Scotland around about how regular reporting in this and other spaces is captured as on a regular basis beyond the ad hoc reviews, and it may well be something that we discuss as part of some of that earlier categorisation piece. But I just wanted to flag that point.
Good. Yeah, no, absolutely agree. I think there's no point keeping that as ongoing actions. We need to, again, to use mainstream it. We need to make sure that that just forms part of the usual business as usual for the committee, and obviously for the reporting to us as well. So I really welcome that, Darren. Thank you for that clarification. I'm sure there will be no position from our Police Scotland colleagues on developing something within that space. Okay, very good. No further questions, points, observations on this, which means thank you very much for that. We can move on to the next agenda item, which is the HMSCS Assurance Review of Vetting, and that's the action plan this time around that we're discussing. And Stuart, I believe that's yourself who's speaking to that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The first really this update was to say where we are in relation to the action plan that's been developed in conjunction with HMICS as well. I know Maggie's on the call, who was heavily involved in the writing of this review, so knows it very well. I think probably one of the first things to say is that the vetting aspect for us requires a lot of work here in relation to how it fits into some of our other ongoing work. I've created and chair a strategic oversight group for vetting and integrity, because it actually cuts into the findings from the historic data wash that was carried out last year as well. There is some real crossovers into some of that work, and also the part that Helen's just delivered her paper on. I think what's important is that the plan is there for reading, and there is some dates that are quite far out. And I think one of the first things for us that we've been looking at is we have had a manual of guidance within Police Scotland that does require a significant review. And in relation to that, we've, through quite a bit of benchmarking, is looking at the approved professional practice for vetting, which is used in other UK forces and is administered by the College of Policing and updated by the College of Policing on a regular basis. That is where we are drawing a lot of our opportunities to really expand our vetting capability, and that also the APP already covers the fact about 10-year vetting, vetting after any misconduct processes, and the opportunity to remove recruitment vetting from someone, which, as you know, was highlighted in the report, we do not have. So I do think there's a question that we need to answer about the APP, what parts of it we can use and adapt into what we do, and whether that's through a rewrite of our manual or we adopt it a bit closer than that. So that's work that's ongoing and requires a bit of consultation and a bit of legal advice as well in relation to where that sits. Some of the recommendations we saw as quite priorities were in relation to what are the issues that we have at this moment in time. And I think the outcome of the historic data wash helped with that quite a lot. And the fact is we were able to manage some risks that were identified from that would have been subject to a re-vetting process and would have been picked up in that. So that's been a bit of a real additional bit of work for us to help out. There also is recommendation 13, is in relation to us going back and reviewing cases that HMICS dip sampled. That work has been ongoing for some time. There is a process in place where we have managed some of those risks that were identified, but also has resulted in other action being taken with local managers and local divisions. I think also it's probably useful to highlight, and we've spoken about it a few times today, is the PECS bill and the fact that vetting has came up as part of that discussion as well, and where that sits. And I think there's a real distinction part to be made here, is that some legislation that's passing through UK government just now covers both police officers and police staff collectively, which is something that we probably need to consider quite quickly in relation to how we can link in with some of that work as well. So it is a bit of a task in relation to it. It's 15 recommendations, but actually they are so large and actually cut across a number of other pieces of work. So I've taken quite a lot from the oversight group to draw on the work that we've already got in place for the culture inspection, because there's some aspects of that actually fits into the vetting review as well. So there's been a bit of work about mapping that. We've had regular conversations with HMI about how we manage some of these and take them forward, and I think we're due another update quite soon. But I am content we're going to get to a stage about whether manual guidance and changes to these that are in the recommendations, we will need to go to some quite extensive consultation on that as well, and that's what we're working towards just now. The group that I have, the oversight group, have a tactical group as well, which are looking at sort of recruitment aspects and other areas that we can look to incorporate into this. But also my next plan is to have a group with all staff associations, including diversity staff associations, to see how we can manage some of this through, because there's a real input from them required in some of this as well. I hope that's given a bit of an oversight, an overview of where we are, but a significant amount of work ongoing to try and get us into a state where we can answer all those recommendations.
Thank you, Stuart, for the report and the really comprehensive update. I think it's really encouraging to see how the linkages are really being considered, because between all the different inspections, different bits of information, and so the different strategic kind of priorities. So really appreciate that. I think it's incredibly helpful just to kind of get a perspective, and I appreciate the detail that's been provided in the plan as well. So from my perspective, very, very good. Can I see if colleagues have got any questions or comments on this? And I was going to give Maggie an opportunity, obviously, as well to give your view as well. I'm going to bring Fiona in first. Fiona.
Sure, thanks very much for that, and it's good to see the progress and important in terms of public assurance and transparency. Do we have and I know you've talked about some, and I think it's absolutely grand. I would much rather see a plan to have something delivered in 18 months than telling us it will be 6 months and then you become despondent and people lose confidence. Do we have a detailed time plan for this?
So that's one of the things that we're working on just now, because I think the different recommendations require different timeframes. So if you look at our workforce and the fact here that we've got people that are in the organisation less than 10 years, so have been subject to vetting within that 10 years, so the new part we'd hope to introduce wouldn't apply.
No.
So I think that's one. So that's given us a bit of a time frame. The other aspect, I think we need to try and through the consultation quite quickly, I would like to see us develop the ones where re-vetting required on the back of misconduct outcomes, which I think would be a really quite simple one to do, and take that on a staged approach to the different parts of the consultation we need to do. You're right, I think 18 months would be a really good time frame to get it all in, and I think we need to try and sort of pick away at various parts that we can do quickly. Recommendation 13 that I mentioned, I reckon we could have that complete within the next couple of months. So there's different phases that I'm sort of trying to not bombard people with everything at the one time at the moment with this, because I think there's a significant amount, and this is a real culture change for the organisation as well. And the fact is, we went from a position of no re-vetting to someone, and irrespective of those of us have been through vetting, it's a very anxious period. It doesn't matter if you've nothing to hide. It's that sort of anxiety it causes, and that's the last thing we want to do, is rush into doing something that's going to sort of increase that anxiety. So there is a time frame that down the right hand side of the improvement plan. Some of those are far out, but my own oversight group are also looking at time frames where we can at least consult on some of the stages of this within the next few months.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart, and really, really pleased to kind of see that the impact of this on officers and staff is being acknowledged as well. Yeah, and the fact that it is, to your point, is there are big cultural implications there as well. Really good. Maggie, would you like to make any comment on this?
Yes, just initially to say, really pleased with the work that has been undertaken by Police Scotland since the report was written, worked closely with the vetting team, and we do appreciate the magnitude of some of these recommendations. And as Stuart's saying, they are, I understand some of them will take some time to implement due to the people who need to be consulted. But we do still stand by our recommendations. We think they're really important, and vetting is a really important part of public trust and confidence. So, but we'll work with Police Scotland to ensure we can discharge the recommendations in a timely manner. I guess one thing is that the APP is currently being redrafted by the College of Policing, and that has been delayed and delayed again. So the new APP is not likely now to be introduced until the end of the year. If that is of slight concern to us, that may delay some of the recommendations being implemented, and at no fault of Police Scotland's will to want to adopt the APP. And also just two recommendations I think we need to work a bit further with Police Scotland before their proposed actions can discharge the recommendations. So recommendation 10 in relation to the annual integrity review, I'm not entirely sure that the actions that are being presented by Police Scotland will discharge that action. And they identified the introduction of annual integrity reviews under their own, the paper that Helen's just presented. It was a recommendation they themselves have identified as being key. But if you read the actions, I don't think if they were implemented, would discharge that recommendation. So they need to have another consideration that, they just need to introduce annual integrity discussions with staff. And also recommendation 14 in relation to when the force executives become involved in the decision making and vetting cases, and these are very few and far between. They are very, very small numbers. We recommended that they should report these cases by exception to the SPA Complaints Conduct Committee to yourselves for oversight, and that is missing from the action presented by Police Scotland. So that's just two that I think would need some reconsideration before when the actions are implemented, the recommendations could be discharged. But that shouldn't take away from all the work that has been and is being undertaken by Stuart and his team. We're really pleased at the pace of so I think they've been taking a risk-based approach to the recommendations, which should be of no surprise, but very pleased to see. And those that were perhaps of most risk to the organisation and its reputation have been identified and are being dealt with first.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. I think the risk-based approach is absolutely, to your point, is absolutely critical. If you can't tackle everything, then you need to identify your priorities. The priorities are the ones which mitigate the greatest risks. So that makes perfect sense. Can I actually just get your view on the APP element of it? Because what was just going through my head is obviously, the balancing there is the potential delay versus an alignment with other forces. So that's again one of those trade-off things, isn't it? But I mean, would you be that there absolutely should be alignment, i.e., it possibly is well worth the wait to kind of make sure that it is as closely aligned to the revised APPs as possible, rather than doing something, just.
Sorry, Chair. The existing manual of guidance was almost a lift from the APP, with certain exceptions, which was that it excluded the re-vetting process. So adopting the APP in its entirety, there's not, other than those key, and they're quite fundamental, key exceptions, the manual of guidance is almost a straight lift from what was the original APP. So adopting it in full seems like a sensible approach. And I think the key changes that are being made in the new APP, there's nothing fundamental within it. It is basically the bit that Police Scotland is missing currently is the re-vetting, and both following misconduct proceedings and on a sort of cyclical basis.
I understand. No, thank you for that. That's helpful. Stuart, you'd like to come back in?
Yeah, if it's okay, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of things really on that from Maggie. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The fundamental parts of the APP will remain on its updates, but I think there's one part for us that we want to go further. So the reaffirmation of probationers prior to them actually taking the oath is something that's not in the APP that we would like to continue. So that would be an additional level that we would put in. So again, it's there is things that we think don't go far enough, but we do accept the main parts of it. And in relation to recommendation 10, first of all, can I just touch on to give you some reassurance on that? I think we need to make sure we get the welfare and well-being of the officers and staff right before we rush into that. So I appreciate it doesn't say a lot in the improvement plan, but actually I would like to get, because if we get that wrong once, that wouldn't be very good. So I want to make sure we get that part correct, and we will get that pushed on. And for 14, I think we need to clarify what the APP position has been in that as well, which is not clear. So, but we will take these things on and get progress.
Perfect. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Stuart. Really incredibly important to Maggie, as you said, vetting is such a key control, so important for public trust and confidence. So yeah, it's really welcome all the work that's kind of happening in the space, and I think this is an area of improvement that will make a difference. So really appreciate that, and we'll be looking forward to kind of seeing the progress against these recommendations as it unfolds. But it sounds like we're in a really good path, and certainly lots of confidence in the committee. So thank you. Right. Okay, I see no further questions or comments, so I think that finishes this item for us, which then just leaves us with the committee work plan as the final item in the public session. And I hope that Colette will have covered throughout the committee some of the kind of actions that have been agreed. There will be additions that we will be making to the work plan in terms of adding some of the reports that we've discussed. So are there any questions at this stage about the work plan? Are members content to what are we being asked to note, I think, aren't we? So yeah, okay. Well, if there's no questions or observations or comments on the work plan as it stands just now, thank you. I think that concludes this agenda item. And this also concludes our public session. We are now going to go into our private session. So what we'll do is we'll stop the